Hello, good evening, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. And my name is Jessica. I'm the president of the Students Committee of Alliance Française Second 2022. I will be the MC for the evening. First of all, I would like to warmly welcome all of you in this evening. To this event and wishing you all a happy Bastille Day. Alliance Française de Kandy is very happy to celebrate the Bastille Day of 2022 with an interesting online discussion on the political rights and the participation of women in politics in France and Sri Lanka, in connection of the principles of the France Revolution. And I would like to warmly welcome our guest speakers, Mrs. Cyane, Cultural and Communicational Intern at Alliance Française de Kandy. Next, Mrs. Shyamali Ranaraja, Attorney at Law, Department of Law, University of Peradeniya, and the current president of Alliance Française de Kandy. Thirdly, I would like to welcome Mr. J.K. Wijedasa, previous president of our executive committee at Alliance Française de Kandy.
Thank you.
Without any further delay, I would like to invite Mrs. Cyane, the Cultural and Communicational Intern at Alliance Française de Kandy.
Merci. Alors tout d'abord, bonjour et bienvenue à l'Alliance Française de Kandy en ligne. Merci à tous d'être là. Aujourd'hui, je remplace Madame Sarah Touka, la directrice de l'Alliance, afin de vous parler du Bastille Day, le jour de la Bastille, et donc de la fête nationale française. Comme certains d'entre vous le savent déjà, le 14 juillet est certainement la date la plus importante du calendrier français. Elle commémore la prise de la Bastille du 14 juillet 1789, lorsque le peuple français se révolta contre le roi Louis XVI en envahissant la prison de la Bastille. C'est un jour doublement mémorable pour l'histoire de la France, car il marque le début de la Révolution française et de la fin de la monarchie absolue. La symbolique de cette journée est forte. En effet, c'est une prise de pouvoir par le peuple afin d'instaurer un régime politique où le peuple pourra choisir son représentant. C'est une république. C'est aussi l'écriture d'une constitution et de la fameuse Déclaration des droits de l'homme et du citoyen qui a inspiré des textes similaires dans de nombreux pays d'Europe et d'Amérique latine, mais aussi la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme de 1948 de l'ONU ou la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme de 1950. On peut donc voir que cette date est importante pour la France, mais que le contexte de son origine a eu des répercussions mondiales. Après cette courte introduction, je vais laisser la parole à Monsieur Wijedasa qui va nous parler des élections.
Mr. Wijedasa, please unmute you.
You got it now? I unmuted it. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, Vijay. Loud, yes. Wijedasa. Sorry, loud and clear.
Right, okay. Elections for the 16th National Assembly of the Fifth Republic. Fifth Republic was formed in 1958, took place in 2 rounds. First round is 12th of June, second round 19th of June. The system works in France in such a way that in the first round, you can field X number of candidates. And if anybody scores over 50% of the votes cast, that person is declared elected. There are some cases who get elected in the absence of such a majority, simple majority, 50% of the votes. The 2 leading candidates are retained for the second round, the others are eliminated. The second round, it's just a simple majority of the winner. But this time, there have been some very close election results. In certain electorates, the winner was declared with a 4-vote and 5-vote majority. We had in Sri Lanka about 50 years ago one member who won by 11 votes, but 4 and 5 are too close. And less than 150 majority, there are also quite a large number. That may also be due to the very high percentage of abstentions. 53.76% of the voters abstained voting in the second round. So that's a huge abstention level by any level. And France being a leading democratic country, it cannot be explained, but people probably got sick or I don't know. They just can't, I'm not being French, I can't explain why. So the parliament is really a hung parliament this time. The hung parliament is that there are out of the 577 members, how many are the governing party of Mr. Macron has got, where did I copy? Yeah, 250 seats altogether. And total opposition 327. That makes up 577. But opposition is not homogenic. They have their own programs, different conflicting programs. For example, there is Marine Le Pen's leader who led the extremist party, and she, from last parliament, their party had 8 seats. This parliament, they have 89 seats, and quite an alarming thing for most of the people. And she also was the unsuccessful presidential candidate for 2 terms now. And the father also contested as an unsuccessful presidential candidate. But this also due to a lot of discontent about immigration problems, etc. So from 8 to 89, of course, huge jump. And also, there are 215 women have been elected to the French Parliament. Of course, the figures are down by the last Parliament. Last Parliament had 224 women, and this one has only 215. But still, it's a huge percentage. But unfortunately, in our country, we don't see anything like that now. Parliamentary representatives for women, it was, let me see, 1988, it was 5.6%. In 2017, it was 38.8. It has come down a little this time. And that is still, a plus point is there because we have the Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne, with the second woman Prime Minister of France, 30 years after the first Prime Minister, Edith Cresson and Mitterrand. So that was in 1991. She was Prime Minister for just 1 year, uneventful 1 year. And to be a minister in French government, you don't have to be elected member of the House of Parliament. You don't have to. The president names the ministers and prime minister. The prime minister before Elizabeth Borne was Jean Castex. He was mayor of a small town in the Pyrenees. He had never been an MP, never. But he led the government for 2 years. But the only difference is all the ministers in Parliament, they do not have voting right. Even if a member who is elected from the 577 is named a minister, then he gives up his seat automatically to what is called in French a suppléant, substitute, which they have to name at the time of the election. All members have to name a substitute at the time of election, who takes over. Now, in this case, the ministers, if they have given up their parliamentary seat, that substitute takes over. That substitute also takes over if the election results are annulled by law, or if the member resigns. There are no by-elections for such a case. by-elections in France are held in case of only death of members. So we, in Sri Lanka, we used to have by-elections. We don't have anything of the sort anymore, no, which is an indicator of the government's popularity. And out of the opposition 308 block, there's a block of 151 members from a loosely formed coalition that was formed only in May 2022, just a month before the elections. It's called NUP, Nouvelle Union Populaire Écologique et Sociale. So they are 151, and with Marine Le Pen and everybody, only they come up to with 327. So government has been elected, of course. We don't know how it's going to function. It's supposed to be the most indecisive parliament in 2 decades, the 16th National Assembly. And France had not a similar situation. They had in 1986, when President Mitterrand had a period what is called a cohabitation. He was the president, but the parliament elected under Jacques Chirac, they were a majority parliament, so not a hung parliament. So they carried on together until the president's term came to an end. It went on all right because the president retained some important portfolios, but this is not a case either. The President Mitterrand President Macron is not in a strong position here to take decisions, or who knows, there may be a reason to go for polls again if they lose confidence. But the most important thing is the appointment of Elizabeth Borne again as Prime Minister, and also Yael Braun-Pivet is the first woman Speaker of the French Parliament who has been elected this time. But there again, she doesn't have the confidence. If the opposition wants, they can throw out. But normally speakers are allowed to continue unless they what shall I say, they lose the confidence of the members, the way they conduct the assembly. And in the first round, the NUP and President Macron's alliance ran on an equal basis, 25% each. But the second round only, it went the real way around with the discontented voters staying away, and those who voted managed to make Macron's coalition a minor party. So it's a minority government, and we do not know how in the long run this will function, and the weight of the France's presence in the Committee of Nations will not be as heavy as when Macron had he had 308 seats in the previous parliament. That means the absolute majority. He didn't have to worry about. Now they have been looking for allies, but so far they have not succeeded. But the government is appointed, and they are carrying on. And one important thing, of course, is the mean age of the parliament. Mean age of the members is 48 years and 5 months. The oldest being 79 and the youngest being 21. So that's young parliament relatively compared to especially ours. So some of the people, some of the elderly didn't recontest, or were just backed off by the voters. And what shall I say? I cannot add anything more to this small resume on the French Parliament. Thank you. Anybody? I'm not competent to answer any questions, but anything what I just stated, if you can say something, I can clarify if I have not been clear.
Thank you, Mr. Wijedasa. We will have an open time for the public to ask their questions. So now maybe we can invite Mrs. Shyamali Ranaraja, attorney at Law Department of Law, University of Peradeniya, and current president of the Alliance Française de Kandy, to share some words with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Evana, and good evening to everyone, and happy Bastille Day. Thank you, Ms. Cyane and Mr. Wijedasa, for the very interesting presentations. And Ms. Sara took us for the invitation to participate in this very interesting discussion, which is coming at a very critical time for Sri Lanka also. So it is important for several reasons, not just for being a celebration of the French National Day, but also for the impact that it can have on the origins of it, as Ms. Cyane explained, and how it can impact us in Sri Lanka today. And I thought it was very interesting, Mr. Wijedasa's perspectives, and I will use some of that in the time allocated to me to draw the comparison and also to look at where we can go from here. When I was researching this, it was very interesting to find that women were a large part of the French Revolution, and also its starting point to some extent, because one of the first events that are recorded as being sort of a critical moment for France was in October, the march in October, which was started really by women waiting for bread, to buy bread, and who rioted because of the high price of bread. So you can see immediately a parallel for Sri Lanka today, because we have seen what happened since April in our country, and most recently in the last few days, which was driven in large part by the scarcity of essential goods and services. And we saw here also that women took the lead and were in the forefront, but not to the extent that could be expected given the long history of political activism in Sri Lanka, as Mr. Wijedasa explained. So in 1789, this was really in October of 1789, this was the event where women were present in significant numbers and marched on the Palace of Versailles and really pressed their demands on King Louis. And we find that this is recognized as a turning point where the absolute power of the king was broken to some extent, was eroded, and the power of the people really made an impact for the first time. And it's quite startling, the parallel, when you look at how Sri Lanka has progressed in these last few weeks and months, considering that we have just pushed into exile, if that can be the term, the sitting president who has not even resigned yet. So the parallels with the French Revolution are quite clear in our context. Now, when you look at the right to vote, the suffrage, you find that actually France, women in France were given the right to vote much later than Sri Lanka, because the Dynamo Commission recommended that women in Sri Lanka be permitted to vote in 1931, whereas the same right was recognized very much later in France in 1944, even after many of the other European countries had recognized this right. But even without it, in 1931, even at the time that it was granted, Sri Lanka had 5% of women in the legislature, elected to legislature, because we had 3 persons, starting with Mrs. Adeline Molemure, who is very well known in Sri Lankan politics and was a very progressive person. But when we look back and when we look at now, we find that still we have only 5% of women representatives in parliament. Currently, out of 225 representatives, we have 12, of whom only 8 are elected. 4 have been appointed through what we call the national list. So we will look at the numbers later, but it's quite startling when you compare it with the French position that Mr. Wijedasa indicated to us, because starting from 5%, 5.6% in 1944, soon after women won the right to vote, they have increased to the highest point of 38% in 2017. And as Mr. Wijedasa explained, it has gone down a little bit, but still it's nearly 40%, about around 37.5% in 2022. So you can see clearly that France has outstripped Sri Lanka when it comes to actually converting the power of the vote into people in parliament, women in parliament. When you look at the percentage, 52% of the population of Sri Lanka is female, and 56% of voters are registered voters are female. So you will automatically ask, how is it possible that women are not elected to parliament in much greater numbers? In France, I have not looked at the number of voters who are women or the percentage of voters who are women, but you can be sure that they have something comparable. But clearly women in France have, women and men obviously, in France have voted to put women into parliament in greater numbers. I don't think we can assume that, women vote for women and men vote for men. There is no difference like that, or no conclusion that we can draw like that. So obviously both are relevant, but where women are 56%, which is much more than the majority, and Sri Lanka, quite contrary to the picture that Mr. Wijedasa presented for France, in highlighting the low voter turnout. Sri Lanka traditionally has about 74%, 75% voter turnout at any election. I think the lowest has probably been a little over 50%, which is considered high for other countries. So we have very active voter participation, but somehow it does not seem to translate into women in parliament, number of women representatives in parliament. But on the other hand, also, if we talk about women's empowerment, everyone highlights the fact that Sri Lanka has had the first elected female prime minister and the first elected in the world, and either the first or the second elected executive president, female president, in one family, as actually Mrs. Sirima Bandaranayake being the first elected prime minister in the 1970s, and Mrs. Chandrika Kumaratunga, her daughter, being the first elected president in 1996. So, 1994. So you have this situation where on the one hand, we are sort of world recognized for the place that has been taken by the leadership positions that have been taken by women. But this is really an anomaly. This is not a usual occurrence. This is quite unusual when you look at the fact that we still have only 12 members in parliament, female members in parliament, which is about 5.3%. The only conclusion that we can come to is that we have to look at also the number of women who are nominated for election, who stand for election, and the conversion rate. But we have largely seen even popular female figures have not managed to convert their popularity into votes on the day of election. So this is, I think, also a peculiarity of the electoral system that we have, which is not the first past the post system that Mr. Wijedasa described for France, but which is proportional representation here, which is quite difficult in terms of someone standing for election. You have to have a party and you come through that. So it's not the place for that discussion here, but looking at an experiment that Sri Lanka tried, which other countries have tried in other places, that is to have a quota for nominations for women to stand for election, or a quota for election to the parliament. Some countries have a rule that at least 25% in the parliament must be female. We don't have anything like that, but something was tried out in the last local government elections, that is the municipal and Pradeshir Sabhas and all these elections a short while, well, not short, probably about 2018 or 2017. And here the quota was 25% of nominated members who stand for election should be female. But that also didn't succeed because voters didn't vote for the female candidates who were nominated by the party. So there has to be much more research into this as to why, even at that election, a large percentage, I think about 54% were female. And why females didn't vote for these candidates is a question that we need to research some more. So to conclude very quickly, if you ask me what are the things that we can do to ensure more women in parliament, and why is it more important? Why is it important to have women in parliament? There are many issues which are of particular importance to women, especially working women, women in social security, who depend on social security, access to law, access to rights to property. All these issues have not been dealt with Sri Lankan legislatures in the last since independence and since 1931. For instance, the question of inheritance of property, of state-granted land under the Land Development Ordinance, which is a very old ordinance, but in that there is a rule that only the first male child should inherit the property of the parent to whom the grant has been given. Now, this may look okay on the face of it, but when you consider that a male child might have 3 older sisters who are disinherited, even though they are higher in the birth order, and the grant goes to the youngest child because he is male, because it is a male. This seems very inequitable, especially given that other countries have done away even now. If you look at the UK, they have even done away with this preference for the male child, what we call primogeniture, in the order of succession to the throne of England. So now a sister has the equal rights as a brother when it comes to inheriting the throne in England. So in a situation like that, when such an important thing has been amended, Sri Lanka has been unable to amend this very small provision where women can inherit equally alongside their siblings, which seems to indicate that women's issues especially are not taken up sufficiently in the legislative provision. So those are some of the reasons which are important. I won't go into the details unless there are questions, but in other countries, we have seen the kind of progressive legislation, progressive laws that are made because of the presence of a large number of women in parliament. Another suggestion that has been made is to break away from this party dominated political system and to permit at least a portion of individuals to stand for election by themselves without having the need for a political party and all the complications that we see in Sri Lanka. Another is to introduce a compulsory model parliament system in schools at regional and provincial levels, which will encourage young people to get into understand the system of governance and why it is important to elect representatives. And I think we are seeing the result of people not being responsible or not being aware of the importance of their vote. We are seeing this in Sri Lanka right now. So it is very important that some steps be taken to encourage younger voters, especially those who are coming into vote for the first time, to understand the impact of their vote and to look at look beyond the traditional issues that we have looked at when electing candidates. I think Mr. Wijedasa made the very relevant point of the average age in parliament. In France, it's below 50. In Sri Lanka, you can bet anything you like that it is over at least 65. We have had, a succession of prime ministers and presidents who were well over 70 at the time of election. I should think that at least over 65. And the youngest was probably Mrs. Kumaratunga when she was elected president in 1994. So I will stop there for now, but I cannot highlight more strongly than this, the need for women, especially to convert the power of the franchise, as the French seem to have done, into representation in parliament, because without having a seat at the table, more women having a seat at the table, the burning issues of our day, are unlikely to see be resolved in a way that is equitable to everyone. Thank you. Thank you for your attention, and we will take any questions later.
Thank you, Madam. Now we are opening the space for the public to ask any questions. For sharing their opinion with us.
I don't think we have many others, Jessie, so we might have to, yes, just conclude unless Mr. Wijedasa has something to add, or any of you have a question, because I see we have only a very few participants today.
Say that, Shyamali ma'am, what you said was really interesting on the topic of how female child and male child get the property rights. It was really interesting, and I hope that it comes to a change, and it will be really nice. It was a really valid point.
Yes, thank you, Evana. It's not for everybody, not not any private citizen. This is state grant land, what we call Swarna Bhumi land, because to go very quickly back to the 1970s, Sri Lanka nationalized, or the state acquired land from people who had a lot of land, and because of that, most of the land in Sri Lanka is owned by the government. So the intention was that these lands would be granted to people who didn't have land on long occupation leases. So very often you find that there are grants given for people to live on state land for 99 years and things like that. But these come under a special law called the Land Development Ordinance. So this restriction is there only in that, but the other privately owned land can be inherited by anyone that the parent or the owner wishes, except where there are personal laws applicable, like Pesavalame in the north, the Kandian law in the Central Hill country, and the Muslim inheritance laws under the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act. So in situations like that, Sri Lanka has a very complicated system where these personal laws also apply. So it must not be taken that, no female can inherit over a male child. That's not what I meant. What I meant was that under the Land Development Ordinance, state land grants cannot be split up, which is a good thing, because otherwise we'll end up with little plots of land, all, fragmented and not enough to cultivate on. But it can be passed only to a male child. It goes to a girl child only if there are no male siblings in the family. So even if the youngest is male, the land is passed to the male. So considering that this is a grant by the government, you would expect to have equality there. But unfortunately, that is not the way the system works.
I hope it changes. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all for this wonderful time. Now I would like to invite Mr. Oshadal, the Treasurer of the Students' Committee of 2022 of Alliance Française de Kandy, for the vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jessie, and good evening, everybody. I am Moses Yaitlaga from Student Committee of Alliance Française Kandy. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who worked tirelessly to make this event success. And today we started the discussion on the politics rights and the participation of women in politics in France and Sri Lanka in connection with the principles of the revolution. As a special event, Bastille Day, which has been celebrated on 14 July since 1789. I would like to thank the cultural and communicational intern Alliance Française de Kandy, Ms. Cyane, for her talk on what Bastille is, and it was very interesting. And current president of our Alliance Française Kandy, Mrs. Shyamali, for share with us the women's rights in political aspects. And it was very informative and interesting speech. And Mrs. J.K. Wijedasa, previous president of Executive Committee, and for his words on the recent election in France, it was very interesting. And lastly, but not the least, I would like to thank all of you for joining us and making this event for more special. Thank you everyone once again for joining us tonight. Hope you all have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.